Welcome back to the Bible in 90 Days. We're on day 33. We're trucking through the book of Second Chronicles, and we're almost finished with it. We've got a few chapters to go, and then we're starting a new book. We're starting Ezra. Ezra and Nehemiah is kind of they really go together. They're a continuation of the same story. We've seen a lot of these books be broken in half, and Ezra and Nehemiah is one of them that's not quite as obvious, but they're both men are in the same time, and their story is the same story. And like I've said a few times, I am taught that Ezra is the one that was able to put Chronicles together, and he's really a a rescuer of the scriptures. He's a scribe, is what Ezra was. He was able to preserve what of the old texts that we have, Genesis through Exodus, Leviticus, all the law books, and then I don't know where the books of Judges and Joshua and all these fit in, but they're all kind of, this is their heritage, and this is important, and it was good for them to have a man like Ezra come. So, and I think we can be very thankful to him. Yeah. And their stories are, unclimactic, because the people, people are people, and God's people are no different. They're the same kind of. I mean, we want what we want, and we do what we do, and we make excuses for it the whole time. There's a lot to learn about people, and people haven't changed in the last 3,000 years. It's amazing. We think we've gotten so good and so everything, but when we look around, we see people are all still people, all just like the same people we're reading about here. They do different things, but they're still the same way. Well, let's jump back into the Word. We're in chapter 32 of 2nd Chronicles. After all that Hezekiah had so faithfully done, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and invaded Judah. He laid siege to the fortified cities, thinking to conquer them for himself. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and that he intended to wage war against Jerusalem, he consulted with his officials and his military staff about blocking off water from the springs outside the city, and they helped him. They gathered a large group of people who blocked all the springs and the stream that flowed through the land. Why should the kings of Assyria come and find plenty of water? They said. Then he worked hard repairing all the broken sections of the wall and building towers on it. He built another wall outside of that one and reinforced the terraces of the city of David. He also made a large number of weapons and shields. Verse 6. He appointed military officers over the people and assembled them before him and the square at the city gate, and encouraged them with these words: Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria and his vast army with him, for there is a greater power within us than within him. With him is only the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us fight our battles. And the people gained confidence from what Hezekiah, the king of Judah, said. Verse 9. Later, when Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, and all his forces were laying siege to Lachish, he sent his officers to Jerusalem with this message: For Hezekiah, king of Judah, and for all the people of Judah who were there. Verse 10. This is what Sennacherib, king of Assyria, says: On what are you basing your confidence that you remain in Jerusalem under siege? When Hezekiah says, The Lord our God will save us from the hand of this king of Assyria, he is misleading you. Do not die of hunger and thirst. Did not Hezekiah himself remove his gods' high places and altars, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, You must worship before one altar and burn sacrifices on it? Do you not know that I am and my predecessors have done to all the peoples of other lands? Were the gods of those nations able to deliver their land from my hand? Who of all the gods of these nations that my predecessors destroyed has been able to save his people from me? How then can your God deliver you from my hand? Now do not let Hezekiah deceive you and mislead you like this. Do not believe him. No God of any nation or kingdom has been able to deliver his people from my hand, or the hand of my predecessors. How much less will your God deliver you from my hand? Verse 16. Sennacherib's officials spoke further against the Lord and against Lord God and against his servant Hezekiah. The king also wrote letters ridiculing the Lord, the God of Israel, and saying this against him: just as the gods of the people of the other lands did not rescue their people from my hand, so the God of Hezekiah will not rescue his people from my hand. Then they called out in Hebrew to the people of Jerusalem who were on the wall to terrify them and make them afraid in order to capture the city. They spoke about the God of Jerusalem as they did about the gods of the other peoples of the world. They work the work of human hands. Okay? Verse 20. King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, cried out in prayer to heaven about this. And the Lord sent an angel who annihilated the fighting men, the commanders and officials of the camp of the Assyrian king. So he withdrew to his own land in disgrace. And he went into the temple of his God. Some of his sons, his own flesh and blood, cut him down with the sword. So the Lord saved Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, from the hand of all others. He took care of them on every side. Many brought offerings to Jerusalem for the Lord, and valuable gifts for Hezekiah, the king of Judah. From then on, he was highly regarded by all the nations. Verse 24. In those days, Hezekiah became ill and was at the point of death. He prayed to the Lord, who answered him and gave him a miraculous sign. But Hezekiah's heart was proud, and he did not respond to the kindness shown him. Therefore the Lord's wrath was on him and on Judah and Jerusalem. Then Hezekiah repented of his pride in his heart, and he did it, as did the people of Jerusalem. Therefore the Lord's wrath did not come on them during the days of Hezekiah. Hezekiah had a very great wealth and honor, and he made treasuries for his silver and gold, and for his precious stones and spices, shields, and all kinds of valuables. He also made buildings to store the harvest of grain, new wine, and olive oil. He made stalls for various kinds of cattle, and pens for the flocks. He built villages and acquired great numbers of flocks and herds, for God had given him very great riches. Verse 30. It was Hezekiah who blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon spring, and channeled the water down the west side of the city of David to the city of David. He succeeded in everything he undertook. But when envoys were sent by rulers of Babylon to ask about the miraculous sign that had occurred in the land, God left him to test him and to know everything that was in his heart. 32. The other events of Hezekiah's reign and his acts of devotion are written in the vision of the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. Hezekiah rested with his ancestors and was buried on the hill where the tombs of David's descendants are. All Judah and the people of Jerusalem honored him when he died, and Manasseh, his son, succeeded him as king. Chapter 33. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practices of the nations that the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He rebuilt the high places that his father Hezekiah had demolished. He also erected altars to the Baals, and made Asherah poles. He bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshipped them. He built altars in the temple of the Lord, which the Lord had said, "My name will remain in Jerusalem forever." In both courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to all the starry hosts. He sacrificed his children in the fire in the valley of Ben Hinnom, practiced divination and witchcraft, sought omens, and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing his anger. He took the image he had made, put it in God's temple, of which God had said to David and his son Solomon, "In this temple and in Jerusalem I have chosen, and out of all the tribes of Israel will put my name forever. I will not again make the feet of the Israelites leave the land I assigned to your ancestors, if they will only be careful and do everything I commanded them concerning all the laws, decrees, and regulation given through Moses." But Manasseh led Judah and the people of Jerusalem astray, so that they did more evil than the nations that the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. Verse 10. The Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they paid no attention. So the Lord brought against them the army commanders of the king of Assyria, who took Manasseh prisoner. They put a hook in his nose and bound him with bronze shackles and took him to Babylon. In his distress, he sought the favor of the Lord his God, and humbled himself greatly before God, the God of his ancestors. And he prayed to him. The Lord was moved by his entreaty and listened to his plea. So he brought him back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord is God. Verse 14. Afterward, he rebuilt the outer wall of the city of David, west of the Gihon spring in the valley as far as the entrance of the fish gate, and encircled the hill of Ophel. He also made it much higher. He stationed military commanders in the fortified cities in Judah. He got rid of the foreign gods and removed the image of the temple of the Lord, as well as all the altars he had built in the temple hill in Jerusalem. He threw them out of the city. Then he restored the altar of the Lord and sacrificed fellowship offerings and thank offerings on it, and told Judah to serve the Lord, the God of Israel. The people, however, continued to sacrifice at the high places, but not only to the Lord their God. Verse 18. The other events of Manasseh's reign, including his prayer to his God and words the seers spoke to him in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, are written in the annals of the kings of Israel. His prayer and how God was moved by his entreaty, as well as his sins and unfaithfulness, and the sites where he built high places and set up Asherah poles and idols before he humbled himself, all these are written in the records of the seers. Manasseh rested with his ancestors and was buried in his palace. And Ammon, his son, succeeded him as king. Verse 21. Ammon was king 22 years. Ammon was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 2 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as his father Manasseh had done. Ammon worshipped and offered sacrifices to all the idols Manasseh had made. But unlike his father, Manasseh did not humble himself before the Lord. Ammon increased his guilt. Ammon's officials conspired against him and assassinated him in his palace. Then the people of the land killed all who had plotted against Ammon king, and they made Josiah his son, king in his place. Chapter 34. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and followed the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. Verse 3. In the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. In his 12th year he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of high places, Asherah poles, and idols. Under his direction the altars of the Baals, were torn down. He cut to pieces the incense altars that were above them. He smashed the Asherah poles and the idols. He broke to pieces and scattered over the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. He burned the bones of the priests on their altars. So he purged Judah and Jerusalem. In the towns of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Simeon, as far as Naphtali, and in the ruins around them, he tore down the altars and the Asherah poles, and crushed the idols into powder, and cut to pieces all the incense altars throughout Israel. And then he went back to Jerusalem. Verse 8. In the 18th year of Josiah's reign, to purify the land and the people, he sent Shaphan, son of Azaliah, the Maaseiah, and Maaseiah, the ruler of the city, with Joah, son of Joahaz, the recorder, to repair the temple of the Lord his God. Verse 9. They went to Hilkiah, the priest, and gave him the money that had been brought into the temple of God, which the Levites, who were the gatekeepers, had collected from the people of Manasseh, Ephraim, and the entire remnant of Israel, and from all the people of Judah and Benjamin, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Verse 10. They entrusted it to the men appointed to supervise the work of the Lord's temple. These men paid the workers who repaired and restored the temple. They also gave money to the carpenters and builders to purchase dressed stone and timber for joists and beams for the buildings that the kings of Judah had allowed to fall into ruin. Verse 12. The workers labored faithfully. Over them to direct them were Jahath and Obadiah, Levites descended from Merari, and Zechariah and Meshullam, the descendant from Kohath, the Levites, all who were skilled in playing musical instruments, had charge of the laborers and supervised all the workers from job to job. Some of the Levites were secretaries, scribes, and gatekeepers. Verse 14. While they were bringing out the money that had been taken into the temple of the Lord, Hilkiah the priest found the book of the law of the Lord that had been given through Moses. Hilkiah said to Shaphan, the secretary, I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord. He gave it to Shaphan. Then Shaphan took the book to the king and reported to him, Your officials are doing everything that has been committed to them. They have paid out the money that was in the temple of the Lord, and have entrusted it to the supervisors and workers. Then Shaphan and the secretary informed the king, Hilkiah the priest has given me a book. And Shaphan read from it in the presence of the king. When the king heard the words of the law, he tore his robes. He gave these orders to Hilkiah, Ahikam, son of Shaphan, and Abdon, son of Micah. Shaphan, the secretary, and Asaiah, the king's attendant, go and inquire of the Lord for me, for the remnant of Israel and Judah, and what is written in this book, and what has been found. Great is the Lord's anger that is poured out on us, because of those who have gone before us have not kept the word of the Lord. They have not acted according in all that is written in this book. Verse 22. Hilkiah and those the king had sent with him went to speak with the prophet Huldah, who was the wife of Shallum, the son of Tokath, the son of Hasrah, keeper of the wardrobe. She lived in Jerusalem in the new quarter. She said to them, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Tell the man who sent you to me, this is what the Lord says. I am going to bring disaster on this place and its people. All the curses written in the book that has been read in the presence of the king of Judah, because they have forsaken me and burned incense to other gods and aroused my anger by all their hands have made. My anger will be poured out on this place and will not be quenched. Tell the king of Judah, who sent you to inquire of the Lord, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says concerning the words you heard. Because your heart was responsive and you humbled yourself before God when you heard what he spoke against this place and its people. Because you humbled yourself before me and tore your robes and wept in my presence, I have heard you, declares the Lord. Now, I will gather you and your ancestors, and you will be buried in peace. Your eyes will not see all the disaster I am going to bring on this place, and on those who live here. They took her answer back to the king. Then the king called together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem, and he went up to the temple of the Lord and with the people of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the priests and the Levites, all of them, from the least to the greatest. He read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found in the temple of the Lord. The king stood by his pillar and renewed the covenant in the presence of the Lord, to follow the Lord and to keep his commandments, statutes, and decrees, with all his heart and all his soul, and to obey the words of the covenant written in this book. 32. When everyone in Jerusalem and Benjamin pledged themselves, then he had everyone in Jerusalem and in Benjamin pledge themselves to it. The people of Jerusalem did this in accordance with the covenant of God, the God of their ancestors. Josiah removed all the detestable idols from all the territory belonging to the Israelites, and he had all who were present in Israel serve the Lord their God. As long as he lived, they did not fail to follow the Lord, the God of their ancestors. Chapter 35. Josiah celebrated the Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem. The Passover lamb was slaughtered on the 14th day of the first month. He appointed the priests of their duties and encouraged them in the service of the Lord's temple. He said to the Levites who instructed all Israel who had been consecrated to the Lord, "Put the sacred ark in the temple that Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel built. It is not to be carried about on your shoulders. Now serve the Lord your God and his people Israel. Prepare yourselves by families in your divisions according to the instructions written by David, King David of Israel, and by his son Solomon." Verse 5. Stand in the holy place with a group of Levites for each subdivision of the families of your fellow Israelites and the lay people. Slaughter the Passover lambs, consecrate yourselves, and prepare the lambs for your fellow Israelites, doing what the Lord commanded through Moses. Verse 7. Josiah provided for all the lay people who were a total of 30,000 lambs and goats for the Passover offerings, and also 3,000 cattle, all from the king's own possessions. Verse 8. His officials also contributed voluntarily to the people and the priests and the Levites. Hilkiah, Zechariah, Jehiel, the officials in charge of God's temple. He gave the priests 2,600 Passover offerings and 300 cattle. So Conaniah, along with Shemaiah and Nethanel, his brothers, and Hashabiah, Jael, and Jozabad, the leaders of the Levites, provided 5,000 Passover offerings and 500 head of cattle for the Levites. Verse 10. The service was arranged, and the priests stood in their places, with the Levites in their divisions. The king had ordered the Passover lambs were slaughtered. The king had ordered. Verse 11, the Passover lambs were slaughtered, and the priests splashed against the altar the blood handed to them, while the Levites skinned the animals. They set aside the burnt offerings to give them to the subdivisions of the families and people to offer to the Lord, as it is written in the book of Moses. They did the same with the cattle. They roasted the Passover animals over the fire as prescribed, and boiled the holy offerings in pots, cauldrons, and pans, and served them quickly to all the people. After this they made preparations for themselves and for the priests, because the priests, the descendants of Aaron, were sacrificing the burnt offerings and the fat portions until nightfall. So the Levites made preparations for themselves and for the Aaronic priests. 15. The musicians, the descendants of Asaph, were already in the places prescribed by David, Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, the king's seer. The gatekeepers at each gate did not need to leave their posts, because their fellow Levites made the preparations for them. Verse 16. So at that time the entire service of the Lord was carried out for the celebration of the Passover, and the offering of the burnt offerings on the altar of the Lord, as King Josiah had ordered. The Israelites who were present celebrated the Passover at that time and observed the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days. Verse 18. The Passover had not been observed like this in Israel since the days of the prophet Samuel, and none of the kings of Israel had ever celebrated such a Passover as did Josiah. With the priests, the Levites, and all Judah and Israel were the people of Jerusalem. This Passover was celebrated in the 18th year of Josiah's reign. How cool is that? Verse 20. After all this, when Josiah had set the temple in order, Necho, king of Egypt, went up to fight at Carchemish on the Euphrates, and Josiah marched out to meet him in battle. But Necho sent messengers to him, saying, What quarrel is the king of Judah between you and me? Is there, king of Judah, between you and me? It is not you that I am attacking this time, but the house which I am at war at. God has told me to hurry. Stop opposing God, who is with me, or he will destroy you. Verse 22. Josiah, however, would not turn away from him, but disguised himself to engage him in battle. He would not listen to what Necho had said at God's command, but went to fight him in the plain of Megiddo. 23. Archers shot King Josiah. He told his officers, Take me away, I'm badly wounded. So they took him out of his chariot and put him in his other chariot and brought him to Jerusalem, where he died. He was buried in the tombs of his ancestors, and all Judah and Jerusalem mourned for him. Verse 25. Jeremiah composed laments for Josiah. And to this day, all the male and female singers commemorate Josiah in the laments. These became a tradition in Israel, as were written in the laments. Verse 26. The other events of Josiah's reign and his acts of devotion, in accordance with all that is written in the law of the Lord, all the events from beginning to end are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. Chapter 36. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz, son of Josiah, and made him king in Israel in place of his father. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became the king, and reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. The king of Egypt dethroned him in Jerusalem, and imprisoned on Judah a levy of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. The king of Egypt made Eliakim, his brother, the brother of Jehoahaz, king over Judah and Jerusalem, and changed Eliakim's name to Jehoiakim. But Necho took Eliakim's brother Jehoahaz and carried him off to Egypt. Verse 5. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king and reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord his God. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, attacked him and bound him with bronze shackles to take him to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also took to Babylon articles from the temple of the Lord and put them in his temple there. Verse 8. The other events of Jehoiakim's reign, the detestable things he did, and all that was found against him, are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. And Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, his son, succeeded him as king. Verse 9. Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he became king, and reigned in Jerusalem 3 months and 10 days. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. In the spring, Nebuchadnezzar sent for him and brought him to Babylon, together with articles of value from the temple of the Lord. He made Jehoiakim's uncle, Zedekiah, king over Judah and Jerusalem. Verse 11. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke the word of the Lord. He also rebelled against the king Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him take an oath in God's name. He became stiff-necked and hardened his heart, and would not turn to the Lord, the God of Israel. Furthermore, all the leaders of priests and the people became more and more unfaithful, following all the detestable practices of the nations, and defiling the temple of the Lord, which he had consecrated in Jerusalem. Verse 15. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, sent word to them through his messengers again, saying, again and again, because he had pity on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked God's messengers, despising his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against his people, and there was no remedy. He brought up against them the king of the Babylonians, who killed their young men with the sword in the sanctuary, and did not spare the young men or the young women, the elderly or the infirm. God gave them all into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. He carried to Babylon all the articles from the temple of God, both large and small, the treasures of the Lord's temple, and the treasures of the king and his officials. They set fire to God's temple and broke down on the wall of Jerusalem. They burned all the palaces and destroyed everything of value there. He carried into exile to Babylon the remnant who escaped from the sword, and they became servants of him and his successors until the kingdom of Persia came to power. The land enjoyed its Sabbath rests. All the time of its desolation it rested, until the 70 years were completed, in the fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. We haven't read that yet, but we will. Verse 22. In the first year of King Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm, and also put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says: The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people may go up, among you may go up, and may the Lord their God be with them. 2 Chronicles ends on a good note. You know, they get dragged through some rough stuff there, but it ends on a good note. Okay, this becomes the part of the Bible where we kind of need to take a minute at the beginning of each book and realize who is speaking and what time they're speaking from. Every time we get to a Bible that's named after a person, Joshua was pretty obvious. It was pretty easy to know where Joshua was coming from because it picks up right where Deuteronomy left off. But Ezra happens right where Second Chronicles lends off, where Cyrus, the king of Persia, sends people back. So we're actually skipping a whole time. And we do have a lot of stuff to learn about then. And when we get into the books of Ezra or Ezekiel, Ezekiel is in captivity throughout the time that we just read about, throughout the times of Ezekiel, or throughout the times of the captivity of early in the captivity. He got dragged off to Babylon before Jerusalem was destroyed. So, and it was like 722 BC when Nebuchadnezzar started attacking, and then it was six something BC, 612 or something like that. I can't remember right off. But and then 586 is when Jerusalem was destroyed. So Nebuchadnezzar had it sieged for a long time. And Jerusalem is in a one thing you got to know is it took until the time of David to take Jerusalem from the Jebusites, and it took 20 years for Nebuchadnezzar to take Jerusalem from Israel, because its strategic location. It's the city on the hill, and it had walls all around it. So I mean, just think about how hard it would be, and then that's why even in modern times, I'd say 2000, the year or 2000 years ago, we begin AD, Anno Domini, but that's when, in 70 AD is when Rome destroyed Jerusalem for the last time there. The Jews thought, they took everybody. Jerusalem's impenetrable if God's with us. So they stood on that, and Rome was the mightiest power that ever came along at the time. Stronger than even Persia was at the time. So I'm just kind of babbling, but man, Ezra is at the end of the Babylonian captivity, and then we're going to go back and fill it in. It's kind of like fill in some of that stuff. But we have Isaiah goes way back to before. So as we get into these books, I'm kind of going to give you a quick little where this story is and how it affects, where it fits into what we've already read. Okay, so we're at the end of the captivity. Cyrus is sending people back, and Daniel had a lot to do with the time. Daniel is another great prophet that was in captivity, and we'll get into those stories a little later. He's along with the minor prophets, so it'll be a while before we've got to go through Psalms and Proverbs and Job. So we've got a lot of other books to read too. So, alrighty. Ezra chapter 1. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm, and also to put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says: The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. And in any locality where survivors may now be living, all the people are to provide them with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with free will offerings for the temple of God in Jerusalem. Verse 5. Then the family heads of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and Levites, everyone whose heart God moved, prepared to go up and build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. All their neighbors assisted them with articles of silver and gold, and with goods and livestock, and with valuable gifts in addition to all the free will offerings. Moreover, King Cyrus brought out the articles belonging to the temple of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem, and placed in the temple all of his God. Cyrus, king of Persia, had them brought by Mithredath, the treasurer, who counted them to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. This was his inventory: gold dishes, 30; silver dishes, 1,000; silver pans, 29; gold bowls, 30; matching silver bowls, 410; other articles, 1,000. In all, there were 5,400 articles of gold and silver. Sheshbazzar brought all these among with the exiles when they came up from Babylon to Jerusalem. Okay, if you might be wondering what happened, they were carried away by Babylon. And then the Medes and the Persians attacked and destroyed Babylon. So you had a changing of the guard while Israel was captive there. And none of the Israelites were really involved in that takeover, but that was because God had punished the people that punished his people. So now you have Persia, who is, I don't want to say a good guy, but kind of a good guy. He's actually, God used these nations to show God's power over all nations. And we start to see that at this time. You start to think that God is, the Israelites think especially that God is just a bully on their people because he doesn't let them do what they want to do. And now we see God being the God of every nation. If a nation has gods, God is the God of their gods. And and when he reveals that to people, they understand it, like King Cyrus. And Nebuchadnezzar got we're going to read in Daniel about him a little bit, but Nebuchadnezzar got a taste of the real God too. Let's keep reading. Chapter 2. Now these are the people of the province who came up from the captivity of the exiles, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had taken captive to Babylon. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to their own town, in company with Zerubbabel, Joshua, Nehemiah, Seraiah, Reeliah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Bispar, Bigvai, Rehum, and Baanah. The lists of the men of the people of Israel: the descendants of Parosh, 2,172; of Shiphatai, 372; of Arah, 775; of Pahath Moab, through the line of Jeshua and Joab, 2,812; of Elam, 1,254; of Zatu, 945; of Kakai, 760; of Bani, 642; of Bebai, 623; of Azgad, 1,222; of Adonikam, 666; of Bigvai, 2,056; of Adin, 454; of Eter, through Hezekiah, 98; of Bezai, 323; of Jorah, 112; of Hashum, 223; of Gibar, 95; the men of Bethlehem, 123; of Netophah, 56; of Anathoth, 128; of Azameth, 42; of Kirath Jearim, Kephriah and Beroth, 743. Of Ramah and Jeba, 621. Of Michmash, 122. Of Bethel and Ai, 223. Of Nebo, 52. Of Magbish, 156. Of the other Elam, 1,254. Of Harim, 320. Of Lod, Hadid, and Ono, 725. Of Jericho, 345. Of Senaa, 3,630. The priests, the descendants of Jediah, through the family of Jeshua, 973. Of Emer, 1,052. Of Pashur, 1,247. Of Harim, 1,017. The Levites, verse 40. The descendants of Jeshua and Kadmiel, the line of Hodaviah, 74. The musicians, the descendants of Asaph, 128. 42. The keepers of the temple, the descendants of Shallum, Eter, Talmon, Akub, Hatita, and Shobai, 139. The temple servants, the descendants of Ziha, Hashufa, Tabaloath, Leoth, Kiros, Sayacha, Padon, Lebana, Hagabah, Akub, Hagab, Shalmai, Hanan, Gidel, Gahar, Re'aya, Rezin, Nikoda, Gazam, Uzzah, Pasea, Besai, Asna, Meunim, Nephusim, Bakbuk, Hakufa, Harhur, Bazluth, Mehida, Harsha, Barkos, Sisera, Tima, Nizhai, and Hatifa. 55. The descendants of the servants of Solomon, the descendants of Sotai, Hasophereth, Peruda, Ja'ala, Darkon, Gidel, Shephitai, Hatil, Pokereth, Hazebaim, and Ami. 58. The temple servants and the descendants of the servants of Solomon, 392. 59. The following came up from the towns of Tel Milah, Tel Harsha, Kerub, Adon, and Immer, but they could not show that their families were descended from Israel. The descendants of Deliah, Tobiah, and Nekoda, 652. 61. And from among the priests, the descendants of Hobiah, Hekkoz, Barzillai, a man who had married a daughter of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and was called that by name. 62. These searched for their family records, but they could not find them, and so were excluded from the priesthood as unclean. The governor ordered them not to eat any of the most sacred food until there was a priest ministering with the Urim and Thummim. 64. The whole company numbered 42,360, besides their 7,337 male and female slaves. They also had 200 male and 200 and female singers. They had 736 horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys. 68. When they arrived at the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, some of the heads of the families gave free will offerings toward the rebuilding of the house of God on its site. According to their ability, they gave to the treasury for the work 61,000 derricks of gold, and 5,000 minas of silver, and 1,000 priestly garments. 100 priestly garments. Verse 70. The priests, the Levites, the musicians, the gatekeepers, and the temple servants settled in their towns, along with some of the other people, and the rest of the Israelites settled in their towns. Chapter 3. When the 7th month came, and the Israelites had settled in their towns, the people assembled together as one in Jerusalem. Then Joshua, son of Jozadak, and his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his associates began to build the altar of the God of Israel to sacrifice burnt offerings on it, in accordance with what is written in the law of Moses, the man of God, despite the fear of the peoples around them. They built the altar on its foundation and sacrificed burnt offerings to the Lord, both morning and evening sacrifices. Then, in accordance with what is written, they celebrate the festival of tabernacles, with the required number of burnt offerings prescribed for each day. After that, they presented the regular burnt offerings, the new moon sacrifices, and the sacrifices for all the appointed sacred festivals of the Lord, as well as brought as free will offerings to the Lord. On the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord. They through the foundation of the Lord's temple, though the foundation of the Lord's temple had not been laid. Verse 7. Then they gave money to the masons and the carpenters, and gave food and drink and olive oil to the people of Sidon and Tyre, so they would bring cedar logs by sea from Lebanon to Joppa, as authorized by King Cyrus of Persia. Verse 8. In the 2nd month of the 2nd year after the arrival at the house of God in Jerusalem, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Jozadak, and the rest of the people, the priests and the Levites, and all who had returned from the captivity to Jerusalem, began the work. They appointed Levites, 20 years old and older, to supervise the building of the house of the Lord. Joshua and his sons and brothers, and Kadmiel and his sons, descendants of Hodaviah, the sons of Henadad, and their sons and brothers, all Levites, joined together in supervising the work of the house of God, on the house of God. Verse 10. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments with trumpets, and the Levites and the sons of Asaph with cymbals took their places to praise the Lord as prescribed by King David of Israel. With praise and thanksgiving they sang to the Lord, "He is good. His love towards Israel endures forever." And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they had saw the foundation of this temple being laid. While many others shouted for joy, no one could distinguish the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and their sound was heard far away. Chapter 4. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the families and said, Let us help you build, because like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here. But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of families of Israel answered, You have no part with us in building the temple of our God. We alone built it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us. Verse 4. Then the peoples around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. They bribed officials to work against them and frustrate their plans. During the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Verse 6. At the beginning of the reign of Xerxes, they lodged an accusation against the people of Judah and Jerusalem. In the days of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Bishlam, Mithredath, Tabiel, and the rest of his associates wrote a letter to Artaxerxes. The letter was written in Aramaic script, both in the Aramaic language. Rehum, the commanding officer of Shimshai, the secretary, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes, the king, as follows. Rehum, the commanding officer, and Shimshai, the secretary, together with the rest of their associates, the judges, officials and administrators over the people from Persia, Uruk and Babylon, the Elamites of Susa, and the other people whom the great and honorable Ashurbanipal deported and settled in the city of Samaria and elsewhere in the Trans-Euphrates. This is a copy of the letter sent him. To King Artaxerxes, from your servants in Trans-Euphrates. The king should know that the people who come up to us have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are restoring the walls and repairing the foundations. Furthermore, the king should know that if the city is built and its walls restored, no more taxes, tribute, or duty will be paid, and eventually the royal revenues will suffer. Now, since you are under obligation to the palace, and it is not proper for us to see the king dishonored, we are sending this message to inform the king, so that a search may be made in the archives of your predecessors. In these records you will find that this city is a rebellious city, troublesome to kings and provinces, a place with a long history of sedition. That is why the city was destroyed. We inform the king that if this city is built and its walls are restored, you will be left with nothing in Trans-Euphrates. Verse 17. The king sent this reply. To Rehum, the commanding officer, Shimshai, and the secretary of the rest of their associates living in Samaria and elsewhere in the Trans-Euphrates. Greetings. The letter you sent us has been read and translated in my presence. I issued an order, and a search was made, and it was found that this city has a long history of revolt against kings, and has been a place of rebellion and sedition. Jerusalem has had powerful kings ruling over the whole of Trans-Euphrates, and taxes, tribute, and duty were paid to them. Now issue an order to these men to stop work, so that the city will not be rebuilt until I so order. Be careful not to neglect this matter. Why let this threat grow, to the detriment of the royal interests? Verse 23. As soon as the copy of the letter of King Artaxerxes was read to Rehum and Shimshai, the secretary, and their associates, they went immediately to the Jews in Jerusalem and compelled them by force to stop. Verse 24. Thus the work of the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill until the second year of King Darius, until the second reign of Darius, king of Persia. Chapter 5. Now Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the prophet, a descendant of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of God, of the God of Israel, who is over them. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, son of Jozadak, set to work to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem. The prophets of God were with them, supporting them. At the time, Tattenai, the governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shelthar Bozani, and their associates went to them and asked, "What hath authorized you to rebuild this temple and finish it?" They also asked, "What are the names of those who are constructing this building?" But the eye of their God was watching over the elders of the Jews, and they were not stopped until a report could go to Darius, and his written reply had been received. Verse 6. This is a copy of the letter that Tattenai, the governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar Bozani, and their associates, the officials of the Trans-Euphrates, sent to King Darius. The report they sent read as follows. To King Darius, cordial greetings. The king should know that we went to the district of Judah to the temple of the great God, of the great God. The people who are building with large stones and placing the timbers in the walls. The work is being carried on with diligence, is making rapid progress under their direction. We questioned the elders and asked them, "Who authorized you to rebuild this temple and finished it?" We also asked them their names, so that we could write down the names of their leaders for your information. This is the answer they gave us. We are the servants of the God of heaven and earth. We are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, the one that the great king of Israel built and finished. That a great king of Israel built and finished. But because of our ancestors angered the God of heaven, he made them go into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldean, king of Babylon, who destroyed this temple and deported the people to Babylon. 13. However, the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild this house of God. He even removed from the temple of Babylon the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple of Jerusalem and brought to the temple in Babylon. Then Cyrus gave them a man named Shashbazzar, whom he had appointed governor, and told him, "Take these articles and go and deposit them in the temple in Jerusalem, and rebuild the house of God on its site." Verse 16. So Shashbazzar came and laid the foundations of the house of God in Jerusalem. From that day to the present it has been under construction, but it is not yet finished. 17. Now if it pleases the king, let a search be made in the royal archives of Babylon to see if King Cyrus did in fact issue a decree to rebuild this house of God in Jerusalem. Then let the king send us his decision in this matter. Chapter 6. Darius then issued an order, and they searched in the archives stored in the treasury at Babylon. A scroll was found in the citadel of Ecbatana in the province of Media, and this was written on it. Memorandum. Verse 3. In the year of King Cyrus, the king issued a decree concerning the temple of God in Jerusalem. Let the temple be rebuilt as a place to present sacrifices. Let its foundations be laid. It is to be 60 cubits high and 60 cubits wide, with 3 courses of large stones and 1 of timbers. The costs are to be paid by the royal treasury. Also the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, are to be returned to their places at the temple of Jerusalem. They are to be deposited in the house of God. Verse 6. Now Tattenai, governor of the Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar Bozani, you other officials of that province, stay away from there. Do not interfere with the work on this temple of God. Let the governor of the Jews and the Jewish elders rebuild this house of God on its site. Verse 8. Moreover, I hereby decree that you are to do what you are to do for these elders of the Jews in the construction of this house of God. Their expenses are to be fully paid out of the royal treasury from the revenues of Trans-Euphrates, so that the work will not stop. Whatever is needed, young bulls, rams, male lambs for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, and wheat, salt, wine, and olive oil, as requested by the priests in Jerusalem, must be given them daily without fail, so that they may offer sacrifices pleasing to the God of heaven, and pray for the well-being of the king and his sons. Verse 11. Furthermore, I decree that if anyone defies this edict, a beam be pulled from their house. A beam is to be pulled from their house, and they are to be impaled on it. And for this crime their house is to be made a pile of rubble. May God, who has caused his name to dwell there, overthrow any king of our people who lifts a hand to change this decree or destroy this temple in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have decreed it. Let it be carried out with diligence. Verse 13. Then, because of the decree of King Darius had sent, Tattenai, the governor of Trans-Euphrates, Shethar-Bozenai, and the other associates carried out with diligence. So the elders of the Jews continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai, the prophet. We're going to read about him. Remember this. The prophet, and Zechariah, a descendant of Edo. They finished the temple they finished building the temple according to the command of the God of Israel and the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, kings of Persia. The temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month of Adar in the 6th year in the reign of King Darius. In the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. Verse 16. Then the people of Israel, all the priests, the Levites, the rest of the exiles, celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy. For the dedication of this house of God they offered 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, one for each of the tribes of Israel. And they installed the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their groups for the service of God at Jerusalem, according to what is written in the book of Moses. Verse 19. On the 14th day of the 1st month, the exiles celebrated Passover. The priests and Levites had purified themselves and were all ceremonially clean. The Levites slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the exiles, for the relatives, the priests, and for themselves. So the Israelites who had returned from exile ate it, together with all who had separated themselves from the unclean practices of their Gentile neighbors in order to seek the Lord, the God of Israel. For 7 days they celebrated their joy with the festival of unleavened bread, because the Lord had filled them with joy by changing the attitude of the king of Assyria, so that he assisted them in the work in the house of God, the God of Israel. Chapter 7. After these things, during the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Sariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Shallum, the son of Zadok, the son of Ahitub, the son of Amariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Meroiath, the son of Zerahiah, the son of Uzi, the son of Buki, the son of Abishua, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the chief priest. This Ezra came up from Babylon. He was a teacher, well versed in the law of Moses, which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. The king had granted him everything he asked for the hand of the Lord was his God. For the hand of the Lord his God was on him. Some of the Israelites, including the priests, Levites, musicians, gatekeepers, and temple servants, also came up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. Verse 8. Ezra arrived in Jerusalem in the 5th month of the 7th year of the king. He had begun his journey from Babylon on the 1st day of the 1st month, and he arrived in Jerusalem on the first day of the 5th month. For the gracious hand of his God was on him. For Ezra had devoted himself to the study and observance of the law of the Lord, and to teaching its decrees and laws in Israel. The perfect man at the perfect time. Just something to think about. It's like 500 miles from Babylon. So it's not like right around the corner. It's not like they took them to Damascus. That's where the other guys that were trying to stop them were from. They were 500 miles east in Babylon. Verse 11. This is a copy of the letter King Artaxerxes had given Ezra, the priest, a teacher of the law, a man learned in matters concerning the commands and decrees of the Lord for Israel. Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra the priest, teacher of the law of the God of heaven. Greetings. Now I decree that any of the Israelites in my kingdom, including priests and Levites, who volunteer to go to Jerusalem with you may go. You are sent by the king and by his 7 advisors to inquire about Judah and Jerusalem with regard to the law of your God, which is in your hand. Moreover, you are to take with you the silver and the gold that the king and his advisors have freely given to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem. Together with all the silver and gold you may obtain from the province of Babylon, as well as the freewill offerings of all the people and priests for the temple of their God in Jerusalem. With this money be sure to buy bulls, rams, and male lambs, together with their grain offerings and drink offerings, and to sacrifice them on the altar of the temple of your God in Jerusalem. Verse 18. You and your fellow Israelites may then do whatever seems best with all the rest of the silver and gold, in accordance with the will of your God. Deliver to the God of Jerusalem all the articles entrusted to you for worship in the temple of your God, and anything else needed from the temple of your God. You are responsible to supply. You may provide it from the royal treasury. Verse 21. Now I, King Artaxerxes, decree that all the treasurers of the Trans-Euphrates are to provide with diligence whatever Ezra the priest and the teacher of the law of the God of heaven may ask of you. Up to 100 talents of silver, 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of olive oil, and salt without limit. Whatever the God of heaven has prescribed, let it be done with diligence for the temple of the God of heaven. Why should his wrath fall on the realm of the king and of his sons? You are also to know that you have no authority to impose taxes, tribute, or duty on any of the priests, Levites, musicians, gatekeepers, temple servants, or other workers of this house of God, at this house of God. Verse 25. You and Ezra, in accordance with the wisdom of your God, which you possess, appoint magistrates and judges to administer justice to all the people of the Trans-Euphrates, all who know the laws of your God, and you are to teach anybody who do not know them. Whoever does not obey the law of your God and the law of the king must certainly be punished by death, banishment, confiscation of property, or imprisonment. Verse 27. Praise be the Lord, the God of our ancestors, who has put into the king's heart to bring honor to the house of the Lord in Jerusalem in this way, who has extended his good favor to me before the king and his advisors and all the king's powerful officials, because the hand of the king of the Lord my God was on me. I took courage and gathered the leaders from Israel to go up with me. Boy, things have changed all of a sudden, haven't they? We went from having a low down, dirty people to somebody who's happy to have a God on their side, who's able to just win the hearts of corrupt. I mean, Xerxes, and man, these crazy kings of Babylon and Persia and all these things, and they're like, oh yeah, well, he's the God of everything. We can't. We got to be afraid of him. We were doing what he wanted when we destroyed you. Now we're gonna do what he wanted to. It's crazy when the pagans who follow other gods follow God better than the people of God. And that's really what we had a picture of there. Well, join us back tomorrow as we go through the rest of Ezra and get into Nehemiah. Those are good stories, man. They were builders, rebuilders, and we're seeing some real revival. And that's what we need in the world right now. We need people to turn back to God like these people are. Sadly, as people, man, we have to have a reason. We have to have something to suffer from before we really get it. I pray that God would help us not to be so stupid sometimes. I love you guys. Have a good day.